The ovarian cycle is all about the formation and maturation of a female gamete. During that cycle, you're going to have changes in the ovarian follicles. We know that the follicles are basically specialized structures where oocyte growth and meiosis won't occur. At birth, the female has about 2 million primordial follicles. Each of those follicles will contain a pregnant oocyte. By the time puberty sets in, there are only about 400,000 of those left. Atresia is the name for the process by which those degenerate. We know that every month, 4 to 6-ish weeks, follicle stimulating hormone is going to stimulate development of several follicles, only one of which tends to end up being viable. The primordial follicles are in what are known as an egg nest. It's inactive, and it's going to be surrounded by a simple squamous layer of follicle cells. Those egg nests are just clusters of primary oocytes in the cortex. Follicular cells will start to get bigger, will start to divide, and then will form several layers around the primary oocyte. The cells are called granulosa cells. Lucida is from the Latin for the word translucent, so you have this translucent zone, the zona pellucida, that will develop around the oocyte. We'll also have these thecal endocrine cells that will be forming around the follicle. The thecal and granulosa cells are going to work in combination to produce estrogen. So how does the secondary follicle form? Follicle will thicken, follicular cells will secrete fluid. These fluid-filled pockets are going to expand and then separate the deeper and more superficial layers of the follicle. Then you end up formation of the tertiary follicle. It happens about day 10 to about day 14. A single secondary follicle will morph into a tertiary follicle, or what's known as a mature Graafian follicle. Use the term tertiary follicle, it's easy to remember. That's about 15 millimeters in diameter. You will have the antrum, which is this expanded central chamber, which is going to contain and be filled with follicular fluid. And the oocyte is going to sort of protrude or project up into the antrum. Those granulosa cells are going to form that corona radiata, which is that protective layer around the secondary oocyte. So that shows you secondary oocyte, shows you the antrum, which is containing all of that follicular fluid. It shows you also this shows you the corona radiata. Ovulation. When the tertiary follicle releases that secondary oocyte, as well as the corona radiata into the pelvic cavity, that's ovulation. And that's a really fabulous photograph right down there. That means the follicular phase of the menstrual cycle, ovarian cycle, has ended, and the luteal phase started. The empty tertiary follicle will collapse in on itself. The granulosa cells that remain will reproduce and proliferate. They're going to be able to secrete both progesterone and estrogen. And that progesterone is going to be important because it's going to stimulate the maturation of the endometrium. We will also form what is known as the corpus albicans, or females will also form the corpus albicans. And that's basically this sort of, lack of a better term, knot works of this sort of palish scar tissue that's going to be produced by fibroblasts. And we remember those are connective tissue cells that produce connective tissue. That's going to be formed by the breakdown and degeneration of the corpus luteum when fertilization doesn't happen after about 12 days. And that marks the end of the ovarian cycle. That shows you what's going on. For short, focused people. I'm going to continue on with the menstrual cycle. I misused the term before. Uterine menstrual cycle. If you're female and you've been through puberty, you have some idea of what happens. Basically, we're talking about monthly changes in the functional zone of the uterus. So you start to shed the urine. And that is because you will secrete sex hormones, various levels that will trigger that, or not. About range for menstrual cycle, uterine cycle is between 21 and 35 days. People use 4 weeks because that seems to be most typical as well as the average. Menarche, which is the first cycle, begins at around 11 or 12 years of age. They continue until about 45, 55, 60 years of age. That's known as menopause. And your uterine cycle can be interrupted by stress, illness, starvation, pregnancy. Those are the 3 phases, and let's talk about each. The menstrual phase is actually the degeneration and breakdown of the functional zone of the endometrium. The spiral arteries that are in the endometrium will constrict, and you will slough off that endometrial. And that is specifically menses or menstruation. About 35 to 50 milliliters of blood lost, and it lasts up to a week. Can be accompanied by severe abdominal cramping in the uterus, and other fun symptoms like that. The proliferative phase is when you have these basal cells in uterine glands that multiply and spread, and they are going to do that to restore the uterine epithelium. They will be stimulated and then sustained by the hormone estrogens, which are going to be secreted or will be secreted from those developing ovarian follicles. This means that the functional zone of the endometrium will actually build up to several millimeters thick. You have these uterine glands that are going to manufacture glycogen-rich mucus, and that glycogen is there to help support the fetus if implantation occurs. We talk about the secretory phase. The uterine glands have enlarged. They're going to be pumping out more glycoproteins in order to supply the embryo. The arteries that are supplying the uterine wall will elongate and spiral through the thickening functional zone. This will occur because they will be stimulated by progesterone and estrogens. And remember, those are formed by the corpus luteum. This begins at ovulation and will last until menses. Menses occurs. Pregnancy is a sequence of events: fertilization, implantation, embryonic growth up to about week 8, fetal growth, then birth. Talk about fertilization. You're taking the genetic material from the sperm and genetic material from the ovum, and you're forming a single nucleus. Sperm becomes what's known as fully capacitated within the female reproductive tract. That cap that they have at their tip is known as the acrosome. It will secrete enzymes to break through that corona radiata. the secondary oocyte is ovulated from the ovary, remember, it is going to be surrounded by the corona radiata and the zona pellucida. Sperm, if fertilization is going to occur, will bind to the zona pellucida, usually again when the ovum is in the fallopian tube. In general, a single sperm penetrates and will enter that secondary oocyte. When the ovum and sperm combine, they form a zygote that is going to prepare for cell division. Remember, you have the fusion of two gametes that are haploid. In other words, fancy way of saying they each have 23 chromosomes. The zygote that they form will have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs. We know that it generally happens in the uterine tube, generally between the what's known as the ampulla and the isthmus. Usually happens within a day after ovulation. So the sperm delivers paternal chromosomes to the secondary oocyte. Yeah, so you end up with a diploid cell. Secondary oocyte will provide all the organelles and inclusions that are needed, the nourishment and genetic program enough to support the embryo for a single week or 1 week after conception. Numbers, which I will not ask you to repeat on an assessment: 2 million sperm introduced into the vagina during ejaculation. About 10,000 enter the uterine tube. Fewer than 100 reach the isthmus. If you're a male that has less than 20 million sperm per milliliter, you are considered functionally sterile. You need a single sperm for fertilization. However, you need multiple sperm to supply enough of the acrosomal enzymes in order for a single sperm to penetrate the corona radiata. And this shows you steps: oocyte ovulation, fertilization, and oocyte activation. Moving on to the development of that pronucleus, which contains each of the pronuclei will contain 23 chromosomes, and when that merges, that's when you get that diploid nucleus. It talks about spindle formation. A lot of this is nice to know. This is nice to know, but there you have it, because you're going through basically mitosis twice. Here are a series of videos that are super to watch. Have fun.